August 1st, 1998. A rescue helicopter flies over the blistering, white sands of Death Valley when something strange catches the pilot's Aja silver Dodge Caravan. Abandoned in the middle of nowhere, its tires shredded and its frame half in the desert floor, there are no footprints leading away from it. No tracks, no signs of life. Just an eerie stillness, as if time itself had swallowed the people who once sat inside. This was not just any vehicle. It belonged to a family of 4 tourists from Germany who had vanished without a trace 2 weeks earlier. They were supposed to return their rental car to Los Angeles. Instead, their journey ended in silence, locked doors, untouched luggage, and the suffocating heat of one of the most unforgiving places on earth. What happened to Erik Brandt, his partner, Sophie Keller, and their 2 young children? How could an ordinary vacation through the American Southwest turn into a mystery that would baffle authorities for over a decade? If you want to uncover the chilling answers to these questions and explore one of the most haunting disappearances in U.S. history, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Unscripted Tales, because this is the story of how a single wrong turn in the desert can erase an entire family from existence. Erik Brandt, a 36-year-old engineer from Leipzig, Germany, was known for his adventurous spirit. Alongside him on this trip was his 12-year-old son Felix, Sophie Keller, his 29-year-old partner, Sophie's 5-year-old daughter, Lena. They had spent months saving for what they believed would be the ultimate summer adventure journey across the American West. After arriving in Seattle on July 10, 1998, they flew to Los Angeles, where they picked up a silver 1998 Dodge Caravan. The plan was simple: explore California, experience the raw beauty of its national parks, and return to Germany on July 30th. But when they veered off the highway and into the searing heart of Death Valley, everything began to unravel. For the first week, everything seemed to go smoothly. The Brandt-Keller family explored Los Angeles, took photos near Venice Beach, and even spent a day relaxing along the Pacific Coast Highway. But Erik wasn't the kind to sit still. He wanted to experience the extremes, the wild, vast parts of America that didn't exist back home. And no place felt more iconic, more untamed than Death Valley. Around July 21st, they left the comfort of the coast and began driving inland. The desert was like another planet, blistering heat by day, eerie silence by night. They reached Death Valley National Park and, in the Furnace Creek Visitor Center, purchased 2 German-language guidebooks, historical, scenic, and in retrospect, fatally outdated. These books showed old mining routes, suggested shortcuts, and painted the desert as navigable for the curious traveler. But what they didn't show was how quickly those roads could turn from passable to deadly. Rather than spending money on expensive motels, the family decided to camp in their van near Juniper, Washin, isolated area west of the main valley. Their last known action was recorded in a guest book at the Copper Ridge. Mine, on July 23rd, scrawled in neat German handwriting, was a message that simply read, "We're crossing the pass." Signed, Sophie, Erik, Felix, Lena. That pass, marked on their map as a direct route, was not a road. It was a rough, abandoned mining trail winding through brutal terrain known as Echo Canyon, navigable only by rugged 4-wheel drive vehicles, not by a family minivan weighed down by luggage, kids, and summer heat. The caravan may have made it part of the way, until the tires gave out and the sand swallowed the wheels. Once stuck, the family likely spent the night in the van, hoping to dig themselves free or wait for help. But no help came. And then nothing. No calls, no notes, no trace of where they went next. When they failed to return their rental car on July 30th, the company reported it stolen. By then, it was already too late. 3 months would pass before anyone would see the van again. And the family, they had simply vanished. Into the heat, into the silence, the morning of July 23rd, 1998, began like any other in the heart of Death Valley, blistering, dry, and utterly still. But for Erik Brandt, Sophie Keller, and their 2 children, this day marked the beginning of the most critical and final steps of their journey. Somewhere along a rugged trail in the Echo Canyon region, their silver Dodge Caravan had come to a halt, buried halfway in sand with its tires torn apart by the jagged terrain. The road they had followed a faint line on an outdated German language. Guidebook was not really a road at all. It was the ghost of an old mining track, forgotten by time and reclaimed by the desert. Their last confirmed location was at Copper Ridge Mine, where they had signed a visitor log in neat, cheerful handwriting. That short message offered no hint of trouble. They believed they were heading over a pass that would reconnect them to the main road. In their minds, the route might have been difficult, but not deadly. But by the time the sun was overhead and the heat reached over 120 degrees Fahrenheit, it became clear that the road ahead did not exist. Stranded in a remote wilderness zone, Erik and Sophie were left with a van that could go no farther, limited food and water, and no way to call for help. Everything inside the vehicle would later tell a story, a camera filled with family photos, children's toys, full bottles of liquor and beer, sleeping bags, maps, and guidebooks. But outside, there was only dust, silence, and a heat that could kill within hours. Still, something inside them refused to give up. They locked the van. That choice alone suggests they did not believe the situation was hopeless. They believed they were going to return, carrying only what they could manage, including a few bottles of liquid and likely some food. They stepped into the open desert. Perhaps they saw distant hills and believed a military base or a ranger station was just beyond. Perhaps they simply could not bear to wait any longer. With a 5-year-old child and a 12-year-old boy, the walk ahead would have been unimaginably difficult. The terrain was harsh, the heat relentless, and there was no visible sign of civilization in any direction. Still, they walked on, and then nothing. No call for help. No sign of return. No witness to what happened next. 13 years later, the silence would be broken not by authorities or experts, but by two ordinary hikers who wandered off the trail and into the truth. It was October 29, 1998, more than 3 months since. Erik Brandt, Sophie Keller, Felix, and little Lena had stepped into the desert and vanished. The world had moved on. In Germany, their families waited in silence, growing more worried with each unanswered letter and phone call. The rental car agency in Los Angeles had filed a stolen vehicle report when the Dodge Caravan failed to return on schedule. But with no clear evidence of a crime, the case drifted into paperwork and confusion. No one knew where to start looking, and no one realized just how far off course the family had gone. Then, during a routine helicopter patrol over a remote section of Death Valley, Park Ranger Daniel Rowan spotted something unusual, a glint of silver, a shape that did not belong, nestled between steep canyon walls and hidden in a restricted area. There was a vehicle half buried in sand, completely alone. The location was deep inside Echo Canyon, nearly 9 miles from the nearest paved road and far beyond any designated travel zone. The helicopter circled back. When it landed nearby, Ranger Rowan approached the van carefully. The sun was already high in the sky, and the dry wind carried only the sound of dust scraping across metal. What he found was chilling. The Dodge Caravan was locked. 3 of the tires were shredded, the 4th nearly flat. The van was stuck, its axles buried deep in soft desert soil. No footprints surrounded it. No one appeared to have walked away recently. But inside, it was clear this was no ordinary case of a forgotten vehicle. Camping supplies were scattered across the seats. Children's toys were still in place. There were sleeping bags, unused bottles of beer, food wrappers, a pair of shoes. A German-language guidebook lay on the dashboard. There was no sign of violence, no broken glass, no rushed exit. It looked as if the family had simply parked, gathered what they needed, locked the doors, and walked away. Later that day, officials ran the license plate. The van had been rented by a German man named Erik Brandt. That single detail changed everything. What had started as a possible case of vehicle abandonment now became something much darker. Investigators knew that in temperatures like those in Death Valley, survival without water could be measured in hours. If the family had walked away from the van in late July, they would not have lasted long. And yet, there were no bodies, no notes, no trace. On October 30th, the van was carefully extracted and brought out of the canyon. What followed would be the largest search and rescue operation in the park's history. But everyone involved knew, deep down, that it would likely be a search for remains, not survivors. The question now was simple, but terrifying. Where had the Brandt Keller family gone? Hundreds of searchers arrive, but the desert keeps its silence, until one small clue appears in the sand. By October 31st, 1998, the quiet mystery of the abandoned van had turned into a full-scale emergency. The news that the vehicle belonged to a missing German family triggered an immediate response. Authorities could no longer ignore what had once seemed like a forgotten rental car. Something had gone terribly wrong in the desert, and now the race was on to find out what happened. Within hours, search and rescue teams began arriving from all across California and neighboring Nevada. These were not ordinary volunteers. They were seasoned trackers, desert experts, and mountain rescue specialists who had spent years working in brutal conditions. From the start, they knew one painful truth after more than 3 months in the summer heat of Death Valley. They were no longer looking for survivors. They were looking for signs, for bones, for anything the desert had not already taken. The base of operations was set up near the location where the van had been found. From there, searchers spread out in every direction, forming long lines across the rocky terrain. Helicopters scanned the hills and canyons from above, while mounted teams searched places even the aircraft could not reach. The dry, cracking earth held few clues. Every bush and ravine had to be checked. Every stretch of sand could hide something. On the very first day, they found something small but deeply important. About 1.5 miles east of where the van had been stuck, a searcher noticed a bottle of German beer lying near a desert bush. It was half buried in sand, but it matched the same brand found in the van. Nearby, the dirt had been carefully shaped, as if someone had made a seat in the shade. Someone had rested there. Someone from that van had made it this far. But there were no footprints, no trail leading forward or back. Just that bottle. Just that one moment frozen in the sand. Encouraged by the discovery, the teams pushed harder. Over the next 3 days, more than 250 people scoured the surrounding area. They searched along the jagged ridges of Echo Canyon, into the dry beds of Galala Wash, and up to the higher elevations where the temperatures would have been slightly cooler. They looked around old mining camps, water sources, and any spot where a desperate family might have taken shelter, but the desert gave them nothing. By the end of the 4th day, the search was officially called off. There were no more signs, no more clues. The family of 4 had vanished completely. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Back in Germany, relatives waited in helpless silence. Officials wrote their reports and filed the case away as another unsolved disappearance in the American wilderness. But deep in the minds of the searchers, one question refused to fade. What if everyone had been looking in the wrong direction? Strange theories rise from the silent sand. Some of them are darker than anyone expected. After the massive search came to an end with no results, silence returned to Death Valley. But this time, it was heavier, more unsettling. The van had been found, a beer bottle had been discovered not far from it. But the family themselves were gone without a single clear trace. In the absence of answers, something else began to grow speculation. People started asking the questions no one wanted to ask. What if the family had never planned to come back at all? What if they had vanished on purpose? And what if they had seen something in the desert that they were never supposed to see? One theory suggested that Erik Brandt had been trying to reach a restricted military zone near Death Valley. Some maps showed that the China Lake Naval Weapons Center was only a few miles south of where the van was found. Some believed that Erik, being a civil engineer, might have had a special interest in military technology. Whispers began to spread online. Had the family stumbled onto secret government tests? Were they silenced for what they saw? Others thought something even stranger. Maybe the family never died at all. Maybe they had used Death Valley as a place to fake their deaths and start a new life. Erik had once spoken to co-workers about moving to South America. Costa Rica, they remembered. He talked about starting fresh, away from the pressures of life in Germany. If someone really wanted to disappear, What better place than one of the most dangerous places in North America? The theory said they walked away from the van, left a few planted clues, and crossed the desert to freedom. But these ideas did not sit well with those who knew Erik and Sophie. They were travelers, yes, but they were also parents. Why would they risk their children's lives for a plan so risky, so extreme? Why would they lock the van, take only a few supplies, and vanish into an oven of sand and stone if they had other options? Then came darker ideas. Death Valley, for all its beauty, has long been known as a hiding place for criminal activity. Drug smugglers, illegal camps, people who wanted to disappear for the wrong reasons. What if the Brandt Keller family crossed paths with someone dangerous, someone who saw them as a threat or as an opportunity? With no witnesses and no law enforcement for miles, anything could have happened. The desert would have hidden it all. But with no evidence, all of these theories were only shadows. The truth stayed buried under sun-baked earth and time. The mystery remained until 13 years later, when a man with no badge and no official title decided he could not let the story rest any longer. A civilian steps into the silence and makes a discovery that changes everything. 13 years passed. The desert remained quiet. The case of the missing Brandt Keller family faded from news reports, buried under layers of time, paperwork, and unanswered questions. Authorities had done all they could. The official search was over. The theories had cooled. The story had become another desert legend. But for one man, the mystery refused to stay buried. His name was Thomas Delmar. He was not a police officer. He was not a government agent. He was a retired aerospace technician from Southern California with a deep interest in survival training and search and rescue operations. In 2011, Thomas read about the case online. The moment he saw the details, something struck him as wrong. Not in a conspiratorial way, but in a logical way. He saw what others had missed. Thomas knew how people behaved in survival situations. He had studied real-life rescue cases. And the more he studied the Brandt Keller case, the more he believed that everyone had made one simple but critical mistake. They had searched in the wrong direction. Most of the original search efforts focused east and north of the van. That made sense based on normal search and rescue logic. People who were lost often try to go back to the last place they felt safe. But Thomas saw the case from another angle. These were not experienced desert hikers. They were tourists from Germany. They had incomplete maps and a rough understanding of the area. Thomas believed Erik Brandt would not have looked back. He would have looked forward toward what seemed like the closest hope for rescue. And that was south. Less than 10 miles south of where the van was found sat the northern boundary of the China Lake Naval Weapons Center. On a map, it looked reachable. A short walk. Hills in the distance. Maybe buildings beyond them. Thomas believed Erik saw that too. In his mind, it made sense that a father trying to protect his family would walk toward what he thought was hope. A military base meant people. People meant water, shelter, and radio communication. It meant life. Thomas teamed up with a fellow desert explorer named Nate Wallace. They loaded up their gear, maps, GPS devices, and supplies, and began their own search, not as professionals, but as careful, determined citizens who simply wanted the truth. They followed the logic, the terrain, and the theory that the family had gone south from the van, not east or north. Their journey took them through brutal land, dry ravines, sharp rocks, sudden changes in elevation, and crushing heat. Even in cooler seasons, the desert was unforgiving. But they kept going, step by step, mile by mile, until finally, something caught their attention near a dry wash about 8 miles from where the van had been stuck. It was small at first, a torn piece of paper, faded but still readable. It was part of a daily planner, written in German. Nearby, they found a toothbrush, a tube of ointment, then a shoe, and then bones. Scattered remains lay hidden in the dirt, among the rocks and crevices, but there was no doubt anymore. Along with the bones were personal items, identification cards, photographs, and a passport belonging to Sophie Keller. The remains had been exposed to the elements for over a decade, yet enough was left to tell the truth. Thomas and Nate had found the final resting place of at least one member of the Brandt Keller family. They contacted authorities right away. Over the following days, additional remains were recovered, including bones believed to belong to Erik Brandt. The area was searched thoroughly, and more personal belongings were found: pieces of clothing, a child's shoe, and bottles matching those from the van. Thomas Delmar had done what trained professionals, helicopters, and search teams could not. He had solved the mystery by refusing to let it stay forgotten. He did not chase conspiracy theories. He chased logic, and that led him straight into the heart of the answer. But even with the discovery of the parents, the question remained: what happened to the children? The final pieces of the puzzle are uncovered, but not everything is as clear as it seems. As word spread that the remains of Sophie Keller and Erik Brandt had been found, attention quickly returned to the desert. For the first time in 13 years, there were real answers. Not theories, not guesses, evidence. A place, a timeline. But even as investigators confirmed the identities of the two adults, a much heavier question still hung in the air. Where were the children? Search teams returned to the area where Thomas Delmar and Nate Wallace had made their discovery. This time, they searched with sharper focus and renewed urgency. The terrain was brutal: steep ridges, dry gullies, and rocky outcrops that could easily hide 1,000 secrets. Still, they pressed on. Over the course of several days, more remains were found. Not far from where Sophie and Erik had died, they found fragments of smaller bones. A child-sized shoe, faded and partly buried in sand. Pieces of clothing, sun-bleached, torn, but unmistakably designed for someone small. Nearby, they also discovered a clear glass bottle. It matched the same brand of beer found both in the van and at the earlier desert rest spot. In the same area was a small toy, nothing more than a broken plastic dinosaur. A child's treasure, lost in the wild. The bones were too scattered and weathered to provide a full picture. 13 years of heat, wind, and erosion had done their quiet work. DNA testing could not fully confirm whether the remains belonged to Felix and Lena, but everyone understood the truth. The family had stayed together. They had walked into the desert as one, and they had never walked out based on what was found. Investigators pieced together what they believed happened. The family had left their van and followed what appeared to be a logical route south, toward the edge of the military base that Erik likely believed would save them. But the desert was much larger than the map suggested. What looked like a short walk was in fact a deadly march over brutal land. The heat alone would have been enough to bring exhaustion in less than a day. The children would have tired first. The adults would have tried to carry them. Water would have run out quickly. And somewhere in those final miles, surrounded by nothing but stone and sky, their strength gave out. There were no signs of struggle, no sign that anyone else had been there, no violence, no crime, only decisions made in desperation, and a landscape that gave no mercy. For the families back in Germany, the discovery brought a painful kind of closure. At long last, they could stop imagining, stop guessing. They could hold services, they could mourn, they could remember. For Thomas Delmar and Nate Wallace, the search had been deeply personal. They had proven that the truth could still be found, even when the trail had gone cold. They had done what professionals had failed to do, not because they had better equipment or more resources, but because they refused to stop asking the right questions. But there was still one final piece to this story, because this tragedy, as heartbreaking as it is, left behind lessons far bigger than the mystery itself. We explore what this story teaches us about survival, preparation, and the fragile line between adventure and danger. The mystery was no longer a mystery. The trail had ended, not with a shocking twist, not with conspiracy or crime, but with a quiet truth that sat heavy on the heart. Erik Brandt, Sophie Keller, Felix, and little Lena had walked into the desert hoping to find help. They trusted the maps they had, followed the logic they understood, and made the choices any of us might have made if placed in the same impossible situation. But the desert does not care about hope. It does not care about planning, or love, or children. It only cares about survival land. Whether or not you are truly prepared to face it, their van still exists, preserved in photographs, a time capsule of a family vacation that turned into a tragedy. Inside it were toys still neatly packed, sleeping bags never used again, and guidebooks that offered the wrong kind of guidance. That van was once a symbol of mystery. Now, it is a grave marker without a grave. The story of the Brandt Keller family is not just about a disappearance. It is about what happens when humans meet nature without truly understanding it. It is about the risks of underestimating the environment and the very thin line between exploration and danger. Erik and Sophie wanted to show their children something beautiful. In the end, they became part of the very landscape they came to admire. But this story is also about something else. It is about the people who refuse to forget, about a man named Thomas Delmar, who spent years studying the case, not for fame or reward, but because something inside him said the truth still waited in the silence. It is about Nate Wallace, who followed the same trail with steady feet and an open mind. And it is about everyone who searched, hoped, and carried the memory of this lost family for over a decade. They prove something powerful, that even in the face of death, truth can be found, that even after 13 years of heat and wind, memory, and mystery, the desert still gave up its secrets. Today, the story of the Brandt Keller family is told not as a headline, but as a lesson. A cautionary tale about how even good intentions and careful planning can fall apart when reality does not match the map, and how sometimes the most logical path can be the most fatal. Felix and Lena should have grown up. Erik and Sophie should have returned home with stories to tell. But instead, they became part of the landscape, silent, lost, and now remembered. If you are still watching this story, it means it reached you. It means you followed the same trail we did, and I believe this story deserves something in return. Please, take a second to like this video and subscribe to Unscripted Tales. My mother dared me to get 5,000 likes on this story. So help me out, guys. It is totally free, and it means a lot. And tell me, from which city or country are you watching this story? I would love to know where this tale has reached. Thank you for staying until the end. Some stories are not just meant to be told, they are meant to be remembered.